Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is the Modlite Modbutton. Whoo boy, what a time to be alive. We're seeing a continuing advancement in almost geometric rate of weapon light technology. One thing that hasn't been keeping up though is the activation systems. Traditionally, a lot of aftermarket light companies that aren't the big two generally rely on the switch system from one or the other in order to power the light, which is not necessarily a bad idea when it comes to cost issues. It's much cheaper to build your light to work with someone else's switch that's already out there, third party if you will, than try to develop your own, because just R&D alone prices can get through the roof. The problem you do run into with that though is if your light is significantly more powerful than whoever you're borrowing your switch from, your light may not be optimized to run on that switch, meaning the switch itself could limit the amount of output that comes out of that light just based on the quality of the current that's provided by the light activation. Pressure pad, click, whatever your system is, it's always better when you're able to create your own switch to optimize your own output for the light as you intend it. And that's something that Modlite is now doing with the Modbutton. For features right off the bat, the first thing the Modbutton is going to give you is a very small footprint. It's a thumb activation, although depending on how you hold the gun, you could use any finger you want, but it takes up very, very little rail space, which may not appeal to someone if they have, you know, a 13 or a 15-inch rail on a longer gun. However, if real estate is at a premium, the Modbutton is going to sneak in there nicely and be able to give you light activation. So if you're running a lamb on like a submachine gun or a 7-inch AR or a 7-inch rail on a 16-inch AR or whatever you have to work with, the Modbutton is going to be able to sneak in there and fill in the available rail space to give you a light activation method. Even if you're mounted on the 3 or the 9 o'clock, it doesn't take up as much room. Although it does default to Picatinny mounting solutions, so it's optimized for 12 o'clock mounting, which is where our rail space is usually at a premium anyway. Even on this 12-inch gun right here, I've got a little bit of rail space to work with, but with the PEC 15 taking priority for mounting because it's a night vision gun, I like to have my pressure pad right in behind that. And historically with the mounting options, like using like a Surefire pressure pad, I've either got to mount it wire forward or wire rear, which compromises my grip in some situations. Mounting it wire rear allows me to get the pressure pad closer to the lamb, but it compromises the sweet spot on activating the light. So with the Modbutton, it's exactly where I need it. And it isn't geared just for night vision specific guns. You can use it on any firearm, especially being the fact that you don't need a whole lot of pressure pad in order to activate the light specifically, especially if your default mounting or your default support hand grip puts the light activation button right where it needs to be. You don't need a whole lot of guessing space, if you will. You can mount the light directly to it, or if you need to have it come underneath and clear like a PEC 15, you can use a Unity Lightwing or similar product in order to push the light out a little bit further and get underneath whatever that device happens to be. The Modbutton is momentary only. It's backwards compatible with Surefire and Ariska and of course Modlite lights, but it's momentary only. So if you need a constant on option, you're going to have to use something like the Surefire DS00 tail cap, which has a clicky built into it as well as the plug-in for the lead. So if you got to have momentary only, and that's all you're worried about, then the Modbutton's already ready for that. But if you do need to have a constant on option, you're going to have to use an alternate tail cap. They may provide a different switch design going forward. I'm sure if enough people ask for it, they'll be able to do that. Maybe increase the footprint a little bit if they have to, or just make an alternate switch system for the existing footprint. But that's something that I want to say right off the bat, because me personally, I prefer to have a constant on option, because my belief has always been light on, do work, light off. So being able to go constant on and not worry about that pressure in certain situations of the rifle definitely appeals to me, especially if I'm using a grip that's not geared for holding my thumb over the bore. because that's not the only rifle grip that exists. That being said, that's a small issue to contend with, and it's not really that big of a deal for me to throw on a DS00 tail cap to give me that constant on that I want to have in most situations. Now for the review process, I went ahead and put it through 2,000 rounds and it spent that 2,000 rounds on 2 different guns. First thing I want to know about any switch is, can it take the heat? So I had to do a burn down anyway, so I went ahead and threw it on the rifle I was going to do a burn down on, and this is 500 rounds as quickly as possible. In this case, there's even some select fire thrown in there for this particular rifle. But I want to put those 500 rounds down range to see if that build up heat around the rail, especially since the light's going to be mounted so close to the gas block, was going to cause any connectivity issues, melting issues, or damage the mod button in any way. So here's your burn down. 500 rounds, leaving the gun very, very hot, but the mod button functioned first to last round exactly as I would want it to. So no issues there. So it can definitely handle an almost unrealistic buildup of heat in a very short period of time. Burn downs, depending on if I'm doing it on my select fire or semi-auto only, usually take me between 3 to 4 minutes. So that's a whole lot of rounds downrange in a very short period of time, and like I said, an almost unrealistic amount of rounds downrange. Most people are not going to get their guns that hot that quickly. But the mod button can take it, so you can at least rest assured that if you're going to get your gun hot during, a heavy course of fire in a low light class, or just personal practice, or whatever you happen to be doing, duty purposes, whatever, the mod button can handle the heat. The next thing, of course, is modularity and I guess ergonomics. Because it has such a small footprint, it may give people pause as to be like, that's not what I'm used to, that's new, I don't trust it, which is a good behavior to have. We should verify everything before we start to trust it. For me, I usually default to a thumb activation on my PEC 15s, even though they make tail caps that lead to, Surefire makes one, Unity Tactical makes one, a few other companies out there. Depending on which light system you use, you can have a light and a laser activation. I've just always preferred, based on how you kind of hold the rifle a little bit differently, to shoot under night vision anyway, unless I'm passive aiming. My thumb activation was always something I was going to do anyway, so having the mod button right there, it's almost like using the same technique, but now for white light as well. Because the switch does share a lot of commonality as far as size, placement, and I guess feel, if you will, as like the PEC 15 fire button that's mounted on the top of the optic. And while I don't mind dual pressure pads for white and for IR, generally one of those buttons sits a little too far back. So depending on how I put the switch on, generally I have IR forward, white light back, but my white light button is a little too far back depending on the rail length, and that's something I never really cared for. But if I had to use a pressure tape or button or whatever you want to call it, that was aggravating, and that's something I didn't like. So now I can still use my fire button, and then I got the mod button back here, and I don't give up a lot of, I don't compromise the grip nearly as much, if at all, depending on what I'm doing with the rifle in order to activate that white light. There's really not a lot that can be said that hasn't already been covered. I put it through 2,000 rounds. It lived on 2 different rifles during that time, one using the light wing, one using it in more of a non-night vision rifle configuration. It got beat up. In fact, the non-light night vision light configuration, I was running it with a Holosun rifle optic, and it did go along for the ride, if you will, on more than a few drop tests for that purposes, and I didn't have any issues with it. It runs like it's supposed to run, it works, it's foolproof, and that increased circuit connectivity is something that it's not super noticeable as far as output is concerned, but it is noticeable using an OKW or a PLH V2 head on the Modlite bodies. I didn't run it with a Surefire body, and I don't own any Ariska body, so I wasn't able to check out alternate powering, but the switch is definitely an improved version as far as current goes than what you're going to get from a Surefire. So if you're going to use a Modlite anyway, I would highly recommend this button. Most people don't really need this video from me because Modlite has not been able to keep these things in stock since they released them. But if you're looking for a simplified footprint option or a future forward footprint option as far as your light activation goes for your home defense rifle, duty rifle, what have you, the mod button is definitely going to fill that role. If you're using an SMG or a very short AR, or you're limited to the A-post length rails, 7-inch, whatever, this is a great option as well. And if you have to default to Picatinny rail systems, and it's very easy to mount this thing at the 12, which is kind of what it's designed for, but you can also run it at the 3 or the 6, depending on what you need to do. But this is something I would definitely recommend to anybody that has real estate priority issues on their rifles. You can use it, it's not going to take up a whole lot of room, and it's going to put your support hand activation in a much more natural or desired position than what you might have to get from the longer switches or by using a tail cap activation. So if you're looking for anything that fills into that category, you're looking for something in that category, I would highly recommend the Mod Button. I'm Eric Count with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.